Hello, I'm Henry from 911 Virgin, the Porsche people in Uxbridge, and welcome to our first video of our video channel. The idea is, as cars come and go through the showroom or through the yard, we'll pick up cars that are particularly noticeable, make a little video of them, and hopefully it gives you a bit of feedback in terms of knowledge about the cars, just general information and so on. Comment section is open, so if you want to make any comments, feel free, hopefully not too rude. And we're going to look at those, and maybe that steers the direction we go. But you know, we sort of take it as it comes and see what happens. The reason for making a video now specifically is this car. It's quite a striking car. It's quite an unusual car. But as it's our first video, this actually reminds me of my first ever Porsche. I've bought and sold a fair number of Porsches now over the years, but I can still remember my first ever Porsche, and it was a mocha black, which is politicians speak for brown, automatic 924. I will appreciate that it's possibly not Porsche's finest hour. They have made better cars since. They made better cars prior to that, but for me as a young lad straight out of art college, it was a phenomenal car. At the time I was learning my trade, learning how to buy and sell cars, learning how to mend cars and so on. And I used to get loads of auctions. And one night I was at Milton Keynes car auctions and I bought this 924 off a dodgy bloke in the car park for cash, all the wrong things, but I was so excited. And there was two reasons why this Porsche 924 was really great for me. First reason was in front of the gear lever, it had 3 gauges. I think you got an oil pressure gauge, a clock and a voltmeter. And at the time, cars with gauges in them were proper sports cars. The more gauges, the better it was. And the other thing was, it had pop-up headlights. Well, pop-up headlights are just the coolest feature on any car. And so, you know, what's not to like about a car with pop-up headlights and a Porsche with pop-up headlights? Which brings us on to this car. My car had this car's headlights. It was a 924, and this car also has 924 headlights. And so, or certainly the headlight cover allegedly was this car. So in some ways, I kind of felt I was driving a flat-nose turbo. I wasn't. It was a little slower, but in my heart, it was my little sports car. So what actually is this? It's a 930 SE. Or SE Flatnose, Slant nose, and it's a variant of the 911 Turbo. The 911 Turbo started in around about 1975. Porsche were racing their cars, as they still do, and to homologate their race cars, they had to produce 400 road cars. So they produced a 3-litre turbo in 1975, 76, and then into 77. But 75, 76 was the homologation requirement, and hence the 930 for the 3-litre engine. In 78, that increased to 3.3, and so everyone tends to assume the turbos are 3.3, but the early cars were 3 litres. So the early cars, around about 260 horsepower, 5 point something seconds, 5.2 seconds, somewhere around there. Top speed, about 155. The 3.3 turbo, a little bit more power. Strangely, the 0 to 60 time, I think, actually probably dropped a little bit from the early cars, but it was, again, just over 5 seconds and 300 horsepower, top speed, about 165. This car has been breathed on a little bit by the factory, and so it's a little bit better, but I'll get to that. So, Porsche were producing the turbo, they were being raced, and the 935, which is essentially this styling, was proving to be very successful. It won at Le Mans, Sebring, Daytona, Nürburgring. It was the race car to have. And one of the companies who were racing the cars was Kramer Racing. And they would, in 1981, they would convert your road Porsche to 935 styling. In 1982, one of the guys behind Tag Heuer went to Porsche, and they have a special wishes program where if you're a fairly special customer, you can go to them, have a chat, will you do X, Y, and Z for me? And they'll do their best. And he said, will you make me a road-going 935? And they said, yeah, we can do that. So they produced him a road-going 935. Proved to be very popular, people liked it, so that's cool, I want one as well. So they also went to Porsche and said, can you produce me a Flatnose turbo. And so from 1986, Porsche offered this as a factory option. And they actually created, or it became the start of the exclusive program. And that's still running to this day. And it was you had to be fairly sort of committed as an owner to want one of these things, because you'd paid a lot of money for your turbo, and Porsche wanted another 60-100% on top to drive away in one of these. So it was not for the faint-hearted. It was a fair chunk of money. What did you get for your money? Well, you got a more slippery car. It's obviously the styling of the 935. And that's quite significant, because the reason the 935 was styled like this is because the headlights sticking up are not very aerodynamic. They were having problems with a bit of front end lift at very high speeds, and this addressed those problems. And also on this particular car and most of the Flatnoses, you had a power upgrade, and which is a 30 horsepower. So this is 330 horsepower. And a combination of the aerodynamics and the extra power means that if you're brave enough, it will do over 170 miles an hour. I think it's 173, 174 miles an hour. So when you say 173, 174 miles an hour, it trips off the tongue, and there are cars produced today which will go in excess of that speed. But you have to cast your mind back to the 1980s, and this car in particular. This is proper, pure analog Porsche. You get an engine, 4 wheels, bodywork, roof, seat, steering wheel. There's nothing on this car which is going to help you out. So you get no ABS brakes, you get no power steering, you get no traction control, you get no stability management. It's all down to you as a driver, and the feedback is phenomenal. So at 174 miles an hour, it does properly feel like 174 miles an hour. Modern car, you can do 100 miles an hour in it, you chat away to people, and one hand on the wheel, it's a doddle. In this, absolutely not. So you had to be made of pretty strong stuff to do 170 plus miles an hour in this, but the car is capable of it if you are brave enough. 0 to 60 came down a bit as well. You're a sub 5 second 0 to 60 time in this car. So all in all, pretty good bit of kit. A few other bits and pieces that they did, a few internal tweaks. The centre console a little bit different. Also, just above your knees, there's 2 little cubby holes which pop down, and they tend to be fitted to these cars. Not immensely practical, but just a bit of extra storage for something or other. I think you've got heated seats as well. And so a few little tweaks, but essentially you are buying it for the engine power upgrade and the body styling. In terms of styling, it's kind of quite easy now to look back and think, oh, it's a bit garish, it's a bit over the top. But I think you have to cast your mind back to the 1980s. You know, for me, it was an era, growing up as a kid, you know, on my poster on my sort of bedroom wall, there was a young girl who played tennis, hadn't got any money, couldn't afford underpants, had a scratchy arse, and she was, you know, it's fine buttocks, and also, you know, 911 turbos, Lamborghini Countach, the big Ferraris. So, you know, the styling was of an era, and I kind of quite like that about this car, in that it does embody an era. You wouldn't look at this and think, oh, it might be a 1950s or 60s car. It's not going to be a car of the 2000s, or it's a 1980s car. But there's a reason for everything being. Its form follows function. The reason it looks like this is because it was practical to do so. It made it more slippery through the air. It put that front end down at high speed. You know, the vents in the front wing, again, help suck air through, keeps the front end going. It stops getting positive air pressure underneath the car by the wheels. The vents in there, again, it helps air slide through. It cools the brakes, it cools the engine, and so on. So it is still following the Porsche's ethos of form follows function. And so I think when you understand the car and what it's about and why it is the way it is, I think it probably helps you accept it a bit more. But for me, as I say, this is a proper 1980s sports car. One of the things we're going to do with all the cars that we feature on here is not only talk about them and bore you to death, but we're also going to drive them, take them out on the road, see what they look like driving, and see what they are like to drive. So let's get in the car, let's take it for a drive, and let's see what it's like. So let me start by saying this is our first video, so do please forgive us if the footage, in-car footage, isn't perfect. We're going to get some, oh, a couple of speed bumps, there you go, that's going to help things, surely. We are going to get some camera mounts and stuff, but we just wanted to get out in this car, have a little play around, so we'll see how it goes, but take it for a spin. But we will seek to improve the in-car footage if we can as we're going along. It's an early 911, so you know, it's a bit quirky to say the least. I always think with the 911s, these early cars, that when they were launched, they took them to whatever motor show it was, and then suddenly decided, Christ, we haven't got any switches in the car anywhere, and they gave one of the grandchildren a bucket full of switches and just said, stick them wherever you can. If you want to adjust the sunroof, it's underneath here. If you want to adjust the mirror, it's just over here. But then if you want to switch from the left to the right hand mirror, it's underneath here, but be careful, it could be the clock you're adjusting. No, actually, to be fair, I think the clock on this one, oh, it's just on here. There's literally buttons everywhere. So they're a bit quirky. One of the interesting things about these cars is when you're driving at normal speed, they're a really easy car to live with. It's a supercar, it's a turbocharged Porsche 911, an early one, but just pottering along like this, gear changing is easy, the car's not running away with you, steering, it's not power steering, but as long as you're rolling, it's nice and easy to use, and quite a usable car. You know, it's not a difficult, I know a lot of the early supercars that I've owned, you get in them and it's a real pain. You've got to warm the gearbox up, just horrible, you know, around town it's horrible, steering might be heavy or just not very usable at all. But with these, really great, very easy to live with. One of the things about this specific car, it's quite unusual. In the last owner bought the car around about 20,000 miles, and he's actually used it. He's had it a while. He's a well-known sort of marque specialist owner, if you will, and he knows his cars very well. And he's used it, you know, in anger. He's probably done 50-odd thousand miles in the car since he's owned it. And what that does mean is, because it's been used all the time, it's been maintained properly, and it hasn't just kind of seized up. A lot of the cars you buy, they're sat in garages and they're not really used in anger, and people don't think they need servicing, and everything ends up getting quite old rather than worn out, and then they end up not being very nice cars. But this is a really well sorted car. He's used Steve at Jazz just outside St Albans to do the maintenance on it, and Steve, you know, knows his cars very well in this particular era, in fact right across the board, but he knows what he's doing. So it's in really good fettle, and you can certainly tell, you know, when you're driving it, it's doing exactly what it should do. It's a nice example. Next, one of the foibles and the strange things about these early cars is, as we're driving along, I can't see how fast we're going over 60 miles an hour. The steering wheel is sadly hiding the speed, so you have to kind of bend your head down just to see how fast you're going over 60. You also find that with this engine, up until essentially 3,500 revs, you do potentially sort of think, well, what's it all about? You know, it doesn't feel particularly quick. And then once you're accelerating, you hit 3,500 revs, the boost works on the turbo, and suddenly bang, you know, you get a whole load of power. So if you're going to drive these in anger, you do have to work that gearbox a little bit. You've got to make sure, you know, you're always in boost so you can get the full benefit of any power there. If you are lazy with your gear change, the car will pull through on a higher gear, but you find it kind of bogs down because the turbo isn't doing anything, and you haven't got the boost on the turbo. You get a little gauge there that just tells you, you know, when your turbo comes on boost, but you feel it anyway. You feel it, you know, pushing you in the back there. And indeed, these early cars, again, it's a technique to driving them. They are basic, they are crude. No ABS brakes, no power steering, no stability management. There's nothing helping you in there. So you drive it almost as though you would ride a motorbike. You're looking a long way ahead on the road. You're looking for, times when you might have to brake, something, debris in the road, a corner coming up, cars coming, whatever it may be. You don't want suddenly to think, shit, I've got to put the brakes on, and you lock the things up. And you will lock the brakes up in these early cars. It's probably going to be the passenger side wheel which will brake first, because there's weight over a little bit more weight over the driver's side. But again, it's cadence braking. If you feel the brakes lock up, you just release them slightly, grab it again, and it's a technique you develop. If you've come into your driving from, I don't know, the millennium onwards, you're going to find this a very, very strange car to drive, because you're so used to ABS brakes. It's probably impossible to buy a car now without ABS brakes, but this certainly doesn't. None of the early Porsches have ABS. You've got to go from a 964 onwards, so 89 onwards, before you've got ABS brakes. In terms of balance and handling, car's probably going to understeer first. It's a fairly light front end. You know, you've had people putting bags of sand or cement in the front of their cars to try and weigh them down, and indeed the whole design thinking behind the 935 front end is that it forces the front of the car down. But to be fair, you've got to be going quite quickly for that to start coming into being. At normal road speeds, it's probably not going to make that much difference. So, how would I summarise this 930 SE Flatnose Turbo then? It's a rare car, less than 50 built. I think 39 in total was supplied in the right-hand drive coupes, and so it's going to be interesting to see how values fare in the future. This particular car, it's been driven and it can continue to be used without destroying the value. It's not a garage queen that you're afraid to add miles to. And so I think it's a bit of a win-win. It's likely to go up in price, but you can also get enjoyment from it. And it is a really usable car. You know, we drove it around town, no problem at all, but similarly you could pop it down to Le Mans, and again, it's going to handle the journey without any great issues, which I think is quite rare in some of these supercars. I probably wouldn't say it's a car for everybody. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as a first venture into early 911 ownership. That kind of juggling of the turbo and the agricultural nature of the early 911s, it's almost like having two engines, and you're kind of trying to manage them. And I think as a first venture into early 911s, I'd probably say go for a normally aspirated car to start with. And this is for someone who's kind of already cut their teeth on the earlier cars, and they're looking for something that's really interesting with a real sense of occasion to drive. You know, and it has been. I mean, it's great fun. I've really enjoyed my little run out in it today. And you know, it's brought back some happy memories of these early cars. So yeah, really super car. So there you go. That's our first ever YouTube video. I hope you've enjoyed it. One or two technical improvements to make, and we'll seek to do that in future videos. But hopefully, interesting subject for the first one. We've got some ideas for kind of future videos and future directions, but comment section's open below, so please do feel free to make some comments. We'll read them and respond accordingly. Like and subscribe on YouTube, or follow us on Instagram, and to keep up with future videos that we put out. And yeah, hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Henry, we're 911 Virgin. Thanks a lot, bye-bye. It's awesome, and indeed dog. That's Bentley. Why you would call a dog Bentley when you sell Porsches, I don't know, but we do. It's just really strange. Anyway, my first Porsche. Hello Bentley, yeah, you go that way. No, you just hang fire. Wherever you want to be. You're either in or out.